Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
Last time on Audit Adventures with Bob the Brave, we met our hero, the chief audit executive of a bustling school district, who taught us to trust but verify and shared the wisdom of his early days. But today, dear listeners, we step into the shadows of deception and follow Bob as he and his intrepid team dissect the twists and turns of a decade-long fraud. The fraudsters thought they had it all figured out, skimming, scheming, and staying just out of sight. But they didn't count on Bob's sharp eye, unwavering persistence, and dogged determination to reveal the truth. This episode is a tale of intrigue and persistence, where every lead reveals a deeper layer of betrayal. But with a steady hand and an unyielding sense of justice, Bob proves that no fraud, no matter how entrenched, can escape the light of accountability. Grab your headphones and settle in. It's time for episode 2, The Decade of Deceit, Unveiled.
So one other thing I'd like to discuss is, or talk about a little bit is missed observations. Opportunities. I missed the one for the hospital legislation.
Yeah.
I'll readily admit, but that really wasn't in my
It's not your gig.
area of responsibility, more curiosity than anything. But, one thing, and this specifically about red flags of fraud, you can go to all of the seminars you want about red flags, and these are the signs and signals and what have you, but they could be right in front of you, and you might not know it. You might not know it. So at the med school, auxiliary enterprises ran the cafeteria, served breakfast and lunch, the student store.
Okay.
They didn't have school books. It wasn't a bookstore. It was a student store. Books cost too much in medical school, so there's a company outside that sells them, and now you just buy them online or electronic. But they also had catering and vending.
All right.
And they added parking enforcement, which is issuing tickets, and student housing, because they finally built some student apartments on campus.
Okay.
And Bobby Joe was the director.
Bobby Joe. All right.
Bobby Joe. So what do those first four areas have in common? It's a little spoiler alert here, but those first four areas.
They're kind of like profit.
Absolutely. What do they take in every day?
Cash.
Money, cash and checks.
Credit cards.
Credit cards too, but cash and checks. And so my point being, anything that takes in cash and checks, because checks can be negotiated pretty quickly. It's not that hard to cash a check.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything that has cash and checks, you got to look at it. Now that's dwindled over the years and what have you.
Right.
But it was a cash area, a lot of cash coming in. And we did some audits, but, I wouldn't say anybody was a fraud expert.
Okay.
And fraud expert, you have to have skepticism to be an auditor, a good auditor. To be a fraud investigator and try to uncover any potential fraud, I think your skepticism and knowledge of all that has to be off the chart. Really does. These guys are good. The guys that do this are really, really good. And they've done it a long time and probably gotten away with it for a long time. People might not want to accept that, but I can guarantee you they do it. So here are some of the flags that were evident later, because I worked with the guy for over 15 years.
Oh.
He didn't buy a brand new car, but he bought a new used car.
Okay.
3-year-old Beamer.
Gotcha.
2-year-old Lexus. a 3-year-old this. So every few years he was getting another car. It wasn't brand new, but
Right. Nice.
it was almost.
Luxury.
They looked brand new.
Right.
He'd been married 5 times
Whoa.
and divorced 4. He had number of children with child support, which is very expensive. I can attest to that. And he wore fancy suits and ties.
Ah.
But at the time, I didn't know what a Hickey Freeman suit was. You ever heard of Hickey Freeman?
No, I don't know about him.
Well, also didn't know you need to be a fashion expert to understand, fancy silk ties and Hickey Freeman suits. I would go to the relatively cheap store,
Men's Warehouse,
Men's Warehouse. That's where I bought my ties and stuff.
Macy's, right?
So Hickey Freeman was a high-end brand. They were based out of Rochester, New York. They were in business for over 115 years.
All right.
Very nice suit. They've sold the brand to Dillard's, and now the suits are made in Mexico.
All right.
So Dillard's owns their brand, Hickey Freeman. The suit company still makes suits under another name in Rochester, but it was, and I had to research it a little bit because I always talk about Hickey Freeman, and they were $400 or $500 suits.
Yeah.
This was 25 years ago.
Right. 90s.
So the director of auxiliary wearing Hickey Freeman, that's like a business executive suit.
Sure. Yeah.
He'd sometimes get in the lunch line and serve food.
In his fancy suit.
In his fancy suit and tie. So the funny story to share is that, Hickey Freeman was very high end, and a lot of presidents wore Hickey Freeman suits.
What?
So the mayor of Rochester was at a mayor's meeting, New York or Washington, someplace, and President Obama was there. And he got to meet everybody, and he said, "I'm Mayor Duffy." And he opened his suit from Rochester, New York, home of Hickey Freeman. And he opened his suit up to show the label right there. So President Obama introduced himself and opened his coat, and it said Hickey Freeman.
Super cool.
So for the record, I've never owned a Hickey Freeman suit.
Okay, I was wondering.
Thought about it a lot of times.
Right.
But, that's a sign. But who would know? Who would know? And all these things, when you put them all together, you say, boy, that's a real incentive.
Yeah.
A real incentive. How is he affording this lifestyle?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the fraud triangle of incentive, opportunity, and rationalization.
Right.
And working through all that, I found out, there's people out there, fraudsters specifically, that don't have a lot of remorse. And there's a fine line between, a antisocial personality disorder, a sociopath, and a psychopath.
Okay.
Very similar traits, but on the upper end of the scale, the psychopath scale, they just can't feel remorse. So they'll do something just because the opportunity is there. And they're not going to feel sorry about it whatsoever. And there could be the incentive, I need money, and the opportunity, there's cash here, I can steal it, get away with it. And they might never rationalize it in a million years.
Right.
So because of that, I invented the fraud biangle.
Biangle?
The biangle. You only need 2 legs to have a successful fraud. Don't think you need all 3. I don't think you have to have all 3. Some people will never have to rationalize it.
That's true. That's true. And it's hard to figure out what their rationalization is anyway.
Exactly.
Right? Everybody's under economic pressure of some sort, right?
Right.
Everybody wants to look good somehow.
Key is opportunity. I kind of say, if you're walking down the street and found a bag of money, would you pick it up? Probably. And then you'd have to think, well, what do I do with it now?
Yeah.
If it's $50, that's one thing. If it's $5,000, that might be a whole different ballgame. So anyway, everybody can be in that situation.
What was he doing? What was he taking?
I'd worked there about 15 years, and I finally got a tip. And I said, something's not wrong. Your best, I got the tip call. Somebody that knew me, knew something didn't make sense. And I said, okay, don't worry about it. Fundamentally, he was stealing cash out of the vending operations.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 170 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
And since vending operation was cash basis, they had to make so much cash to pay expenses, and it was monitored. He had to cover up the theft of cash. And the way he did that was he sold vending, Cokes and candy, to the student store at 10 times the price.
Oh,
And all he needed was a journal voucher to make that happen.
gotcha.
So the expenses were padded in the student store, and which made a lot of money anyway, but the cash amounts stayed level or slightly increased. They never dropped off precipitously,
Gotcha.
which would have raised a lot of flags.
Gotcha.
And he was able to do that for years and years and years, and stole thousands of dollars a month. Now he had collusion.
Ah, I see.
His accountant was in on it with him.
Oh, no.
It's so very hard to catch, if impossible, with collusion. Two people that can manage and cover it up, very hard. And that's why it took 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I also found about 10 other scams.
Ah, that he was running?
10 other scams. He would buy stuff for his department or for the store and return it. And instead of getting credit, store credit,
Get the
he got
money.
a check. So he was able to take the checks out of the mail. That's where parking came involved. We caught him by stealing parking payments. A $25 parking check someone had paid is what got him busted.
Darn.
Because in his wisdom, he had implemented those little handheld computers. You go out, punch in the license plate, spits out a ticket, you stick on the windshield. You ever had one of those in Austin?
Yeah, yeah.
Hate those. If you don't pay it in 10 days, the price goes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he took the check and he was able to then delete the ticket from the system.
Okay.
He had access to the parking system. Well, he didn't do it, but his manager said, hey,
Sure.
delete these 10 tickets because they're VIP people. We don't want to
Right. But they gave him the money anyway.
They're donors, they're what have you. And so he just sent a list, these tickets. Those were the tickets that he stole the money from. Well, one time he was late and the dunning notice went out from this little smart system he implemented.
Uh-oh.
They bring the handheld back and dock it, and it collects all the information.
Right.
They would do a search to find the car owner by license plate, mail you a
Another reminder.
late payment. So now it was 25, now you owe 35. And the guy called up, he goes,
I paid it.
I paid that ticket. You cashed my check.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that was fishy. So I went to the bank and got the deposit where was that check? Where was that check? It was in the student store deposit. Well, I'd worked there 15 years. You can't go to the student store and pay your parking ticket. So why was a check in that deposit? So we pulled deposits, went back, and we found parking tickets in there. He was stealing other checks out of the mail. Apple rebate checks was a big one. Apple rebate, if you're in the program, educational program, you get rebates
Gotcha.
from what you sell.
Gotcha.
Even if you buy it online, the school got a rebate of 6%.
Gotcha.
And so those checks could be several thousand a month, upwards of, $7,000, $8,000 I saw.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So he would put that check in the deposit and then take $1,000 of cash out. So the deposit balance, to say the deposit was $2,000 total, it was still $2,000 total.
But he was taking the
But
check.
the makeup from the point of sale system would have been, instead of 1,500 cash and 500 checks, it was 500 cash and 1,500 checks.
Wow.
And how did he get to the deposit? Well, he told the student store, I'm going to audit you on an ongoing basis. So he'd just go over to the safe and pull the deposit out, come back, start taking money out. How many checks do I have to put in? Redo the deposit and drop it off.
Wow. Wow.
So I had a guy working with me and I said, well, these Apple rebate checks are interesting. Why don't you call Apple and see where can we get the full list of checks, everything they paid us since day one.
Okay.
And we went back 3.5 years. And not only did they give it to us, they said, oh, you can look online. There's a system that you can look and see at the rebate check amount and see the detail for every single purchase. $100 for this software, you got $6 of that.
Yeah.
You bought a computer for $1,500, you got 6% of that. Perfect detail, right? So we logged into the system, got every single check, went back to the beginning, 3.5 years. He had deposited the first 2 checks. Every single one after that was stolen.
Wow.
So we eventually identified $160,000 of checks that he had stolen directly from the bank account deposits.
Wow.
And the reason it was so easy to find the bank accounts was that Student Store had to turn in a deposit every day, right? Monday through Friday. Well, Friday, they would lock it up over the weekend. They would deposit Fridays, it was really Thursdays. And on Mondays, it was from the previous Friday. Well, if he was stealing all this cash and he had to take 2 or 3 days worth, we wouldn't have a deposit. So we did a gap analysis and said, give me all the dates. And if it wasn't a weekend, a Saturday, Sunday, we picked the next deposit. So maybe he turned it in on Thursday and it was 5 days of deposits. And we had him red-handed. We busted him red-handed. But we started, digging more, and then we found the theft of cash concessions or vending operations, call it concessions.
You said 10 different schemes.
And within a couple of days, we had suspended him, and we were working toward, termination and all that, prosecution and what have you. I throw in that piece about sociopath and psychopath. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but there's a good book you should read called Working with Monsters by Dr. John Clark, an Australian guy, who I actually got to meet in Amsterdam at the International IA conference way back in 2007.
Okay.
And he talks about it, and he talks about how they just don't have the ability to show remorse, but it'd be very charming, and they can find their way up the ladder in corporate environment.
Sure.
Very interesting read. And I truly thought that Bobby Joe just didn't have any remorse. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But it was obviously for various reasons. We took 3 years to adjudicate that. I met with 3 different district attorneys to get the case moved forward. Him and Jan pled out to felony theft. Restitution was $160,000. So the scam of stealing cash from concessions and inflating sales in the Student Store,
Didn't even get.
we did some really neat forensic accounting work to show the cost of goods sold. This was only $10 worth of product. There's no way it could be $100.
Yeah.
And identified over $550,000 that then insurance, we made a claim on, and they paid us.
Oh, okay. Good.
So insurance won't pay you a dime unless you've got really good records.
Good job.
And these were forensic accounting work. So I thought it was pretty novel at the time. And I told the DAs every time, I said, I'm always curious. We think he was stealing from the cafeteria operations. We just don't know how. And it never made money for years and years and years. It was always barely breaking even. And the lines it was the only place you could eat on campus. Didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And people had done audits, and it was portion control, and it was somebody stealing inventory. It was always this, and the manager can't manage it right, and on and on. It was always pointing the finger at somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, the DA when she met with the plea agreement with Jan, the co-conspirator, said, well, there's one more thing. It's past the statute, but we'd like to know how y'all were stealing money from the cafeteria. She dropped it on at the end, and Jan's face went white. She couldn't believe it. She thought that was long gone. But it was part of the plea. You had to be honest, tell them everything. 10 years deferred. They never got a day in jail.
Gosh.
But restitution of $160,000. And Jan confessed because they had 4 different registers. And you know what the shell game is, moving the shells around, and where's the coin, and you're moving.
Yeah.
They shuffled 4 cash registers around every day so that cash register 1 wasn't used every day.
All right.
So you use it every 3rd day or what have you. But every day they took one cash register's receipts and stole it. Just stole it.
Oh.
Never turned it in.
Okay.
So unless you did, from September 1 through August 31, every register beginning to end on the Z tapes, you would never know there was a gap.
All right. So why does it matter that they didn't use one register? So if they just took the other 3 registers and they stole register number 4, let's say, stole all the money.
They would use 2 a day. So they had 4. And it was an overflow mechanism that someone could jump in there and start checking people out if they needed to. But if you used 1 and 2 one day and then 1 and 4 the next day, there was never a day-by-day log, so to speak. And
Oh.
so the Z tape is the running total of the register from beginning of time on the old mechanical registers. So you would, if you started day one, you would have seen, well, you've got activity, but where's the money?
And then they would say, what? The accountant was in on this.
We never caught them. We weren't sophisticated enough on retail sales auditing.
I gotcha.
So it was an opportunity missed. But I finally got to the end of the explanation. How were they stealing money from it? Well, one side of that equation is you have to remember that's the expense side. Portion control, you give them too much food out, right? You have lost inventory. Somebody takes frozen food out the back door.
Right.
That's all the expense side. Your salaries are too high. But what's the other side of cost of goods sold? Revenue. So sometimes the simplest explanation, the revenue number, was never what it should have been. Somebody's stealing cash. So anyway, we found out.
So that was a thing that, okay. So
That was one of his scams. It was, they never could make money. So basically we outsourced it and put in food court vendors. And then he just changed the scams to do other stuff, to steal money otherwise.
15 years.
So I recovered about $700,000 through restitution and insurance.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!